one of the most amusing things to me is watching spiritual people and scientists argue over the topic we're going to talk about, okay? It reminds me of watching a little kid who says, I'm going to hold my breath until I get that cookie or something, and you're the adult in the room, and you know that that kid is not going to win that battle, okay? The kid has a perspective, if I just hold my breath, I'll get them to change their mind. And of course, eventually you can just sit back and wait for the inevitable, okay? Well, the thing about what we're going to talk about, the movie After Death, it's ultimately an inevitability. That you have two sides that are arguing over what was in essence the same thing. The scientists and the spiritualists, the dynamic is really a yin-yang dynamic. They complement each other beautifully. I believe it was Einstein, which is to say I know he was credited with this. I don't know if he said it for sure, and if he didn't, I'll say it. Who said that religion without science is lame, and science without religion is blind. Right? The fact is we need these things working together. And Einstein also said, one of my more favorite quotes, which he was largely talking about science and the larger picture in general, but if you were to go up to a cave and see a lion's tail coming out of the cave and it's wagging, but you can't see in the cave, can you make an assumption about what's in there? Yeah, a lion. And yet you never get to see the lion. You might assume that it's there. I like to apply that, and he did it with a lot of his scientific understandings, and others have applied it to the idea of what God might be, for example. But Einstein said specifically that the dimensions of nature are too huge. We're not able to see everything. Okay? Well, God and afterlife and things like that, in some ways are too huge for us. We're never going to be able to see it. But we can see the tail. And you can see enough to pull you in. And you can see enough to merge these things. Okay? So we're going to talk about the movie After Death, which just came out a couple days ago. I recommend everybody go watch it just for information's sake. It'll inspire some, others might roll their eyes. I was reading some reviews of it, and that's exactly what I was getting. Some thinking it was massively inspiring and some sort of evidence for them, and others were thinking this is Christian propaganda. And that was one of the things that someone used as a criticism. So I'm going to talk about it from a different angle, which is to say these things work together perfectly, and they overlap perfectly, but they don't connect at all. One of the first lines in the movie, one of the guys says, near-death experience. The movie's about 10 people had near-death experiences, okay? Which is to say they died, had an experience, and then they came back. And the question is that experience they're having scientifically provable in any way? And early in the movie, one of the people in the movie says, near-death experience is where science meets religion. And to me, that's a little bit like the boy saying, I'm not going to breathe again until I get my cookie or something like that. Because to me, science and religion don't meet through near-death experience. They couldn't possibly meet that way. Because by definition, experience is subjective. And science is objective. These two things can't meet. Now, there is a point of meeting, but in my opinion, the movie didn't do it. Because the whole idea of having an experience is something that you have individually. It's unique to you. It's quite subjective. And I like to think this was demonstrated or proven a long time ago in the movie Contact. If you saw the movie Contact with Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey. And one of my favorite all-time scenes, see, Jodie Foster was the scientist in that movie, and Matthew McConaughey was the spiritual person. And they're talking about making contact, extraterrestrials, other side, afterlife stuff in its way. And they're having a conversation, and Jodie Foster is insisting on the scientific angle. And Matthew McConaughey is talking to her, trying to talk through with her his perspective. And at one point, she says, how can you believe in a God when there is no evidence of it? And Matthew McConaughey says to her, do you believe in love? Have you ever felt love before? And she says, yes, of course. And he says, prove it. Can you prove love? Can you prove you're in love? Can't you just act it? Don't plenty of actors and actresses act that role? Can you prove you're forgiving? Can you prove you're patient? Can you just act that? When you say I love you, do you mean it? When you say I forgive you, or will you forgive me, do you mean it? Or are you manipulating? Is there any way to prove this stuff? It's a subjective experience. Near-death experience is a subjective experience. It can't be proven. And that's like the point. And again, that's what life's all about. Learning to have that experience on your own, yourself. Hence Buddha's last words, strive for your own liberation with diligence. And that's going to come into this quite nicely. See, Ram Dass said, one of my favorite all-time quotes, "To one who has had the experience, no explanation is necessary. To one who has not, no explanation is possible." And he said that in Be Here Now. He's not talking about near-death experience. He's basically talking about a spiritual or God-level experience, Christ consciousness, Buddha nature, those types of things. And he's talking about the fact that if someone's had the experience, you can't take that from them. They've had the experience. And when I consider and I read the cynics of this stuff, I respect where they're at, because if they haven't had the experience, that's the way they're going to talk. A 8-year-old who's never been in love is going to think it's strange, right? You know, what are these teenagers doing? And if you haven't had the experience of a God or anything spiritual, you're not going to think it exists. And there is no scientific evidence for it. So it's the same thing as Jodie Foster. Love exists, but can you prove it? It's unprovable. And so the whole premise of a movie that's going to somehow try to say that science is going to prove this is laughable, especially if you're spiritual, because it removes the entire point of spirituality, which is faith, which is, as it says in Hebrews, evidence of things unseen. Okay? Why are spiritual people trying to prove anything? You don't need to. It's not necessary. And at the same time, why are scientific people trying to say it doesn't exist? The cynicism inherent in that is hilarious, because as a therapist, I know the most important thing I can do with a client is to go to where they're at. And that can be here, or it can be here, or anywhere in between. But if I hear someone tell me that this is an experience they had, and I deny it out of the box, I'm not going to be very good for them, okay? Join people where they're at. We'll learn a lot more than what we tend to do, which is sit around and tell people, well, I haven't had the experience. That means you are wrong. That's just silly. And that's, of course, the essence of what Ram Dass is saying. So we're going to cover a lot of different things, lots of words up here, but I want to emphasize this word gnosis. I want to do a lot more groups on it coming up. But gnosis, it means in Greek, I think it means to know. All right, to know something. And agnostic is someone who doesn't know. Gnosis is when you just know something is true. And a really simple example of that is 2 + 2. When you were born, you didn't know that. And then you came to know it. After a while, it clicked. You're a little kid, and it's 4. You know that's 4. You know it's true. You know that. You don't have anyone to prove it. Doesn't prove to you anymore, right? But if you talk to someone who says, no, I think it's 5, we're back to the little boy going, no, I'm going to hold on to the fact that it's 5. You know they're wrong. You don't have to argue with someone that you know is wrong, okay? And they're going to lose that one, because objectively, 2 + 2 is 4. That's it. You have that experience, and your knowing of it contrasted to their subjective experience of saying it's something else. Why would you argue with them? They'll eventually come around to your perception of things, because, that's something that's true. Well, the same thing can be said of the afterlife. And we're going to talk about the words afterlife and after death in a second, but like the idea of, do we have a physical death and then something continues? People often say, oh, there's no way anyone can know that. Well, that's silly. That would be like saying no one can figure out how to get to the moon, or no one can figure out the square root of 49, or any number of things that we figured out. Oh, there have been plenty of people that have figured it out. I would say with certainty, Jesus went to the cross knowing that there was an afterlife. It's why he was able to do what he did, okay? And that's a huge part of his teaching anyways. And all the prophets are teaching that one way or another with great clarity. As well as they know 2 + 2 = 4, they know there's an afterlife. That's gnosis. No need to argue about it. The Tao says the same thing. The sage doesn't speak, he waits to be asked. There doesn't need to be an impulse. Muhammad says that. Truth stands out clear from error, so no compulsion in religion. There shouldn't be a need for a scientist to tell a spiritual person, or a spiritual person to tell a scientific person, or a Christian to tell a Jew, to tell a Muslim, to tell an atheist or whatever. No, this is how it is. There's no need for that. If we want to explore it together, fine. That's what we're here doing. But there shouldn't be a compulsion to force it on someone else. And so why would I try to convince someone else of my experience? I don't need to do that. Especially if you had a specific kind of experience like Ram Dass is talking about. It takes all the pressure off, okay? And so the concept of gnosis is present with an idea like afterlife. Some people just know. And they're not really it's not that important to them to convince others, because it's sufficient. So after death makes me smile too, just the mere concept. I've always thought, because I've heard it said afterlife, of course, we think of it the same way. And what I've learned, my own personal experience over the years, is it's not an afterlife after death thing. This is pre-life, pre-death. We're like in preschool, okay? The real life is what we often call the other side. And we're going to talk about why that doesn't work that well either. But afterlife, to me, is like saying 4th grade is after 3rd. If you're in 4th grade now, what grade are you in? I'm in after 3rd. Oh, that's weird. Why would you say that? Okay? Because it's putting emphasis on 3rd, or it's putting emphasis on this place to say afterlife or after death. This is not the primary place. It's what we obsess over. That part's true. And because we cling to it, we have this experience. But if we release it, right? And if we have the Buddha experience and we wake up to the true nature of reality, we realize that this isn't the primary place. And so we wouldn't think in terms of afterlife or after death. We just think of it as life. Just like school is just school. And there's phases of development. Okay? We get that. And so there is the transition from what this physical life is to the life afterwards. That's a better word, transition. But death itself, as we're going to say, make the case of, it means something completely different. Not the way we tend to think of it. What I like to emphasize is it's easy to understand the afterlife, after death concepts by just understanding how water works. H2O, very simply. Or all things that have gas, liquid, and solid forms. And it's really simple using water. There's a gas stage of water called vapor. Okay? And if vapor starts to cool, it slows down. It condenses into a liquid. And if it continues to slow down and cool, it becomes a solid. Is that too much for anyone? Did you get it? Probably everyone in the world got that, right? Really simple. Gas to liquid to solid, condensing. That's what it does, and condensing means slow down. It's also where I like to slide in Einstein's E equals mc squared equation. I've done this a few times before with this equation. E equals mc squared is similar to 8 equals 4 times 2. And if I take the 2 and I put it under the 8 divided by 2 equals 4. That's a fact. That's gnosis, right? If you know that that's true, that's how math works, equations work. So I like to take the c squared of Einstein's equation, put it under E, and if you take energy and you slow it down, just like 8 is reduced to 4, if E is reduced by c squared, you get m, or mass, which is our bodies. You get stuff. Because if you slow down energy, you get stuff. Okay? Well, now I go to this side. If gas is thought of as spirit, and spirit gets slowed down, well, now we have this mental thing going on. Literally minds, okay? And that is equivalent to water, which becomes the great metaphor that it is for most of the biblical teachings of water. Jesus walking on the water, he was above his ego mind. Baptism by water, which is a cleansing with pure mind, okay? The great flood in Noah's Ark is when you get overwhelmed by the mind and all the emotional states. And yes, mind is super connected to emotions. And so if you slow down spirit, you have mind show up. And if you keep slowing it down, you have a body. All right? So we have the physical aspect of the spiritual self right now. I'm looking at all your souls right now. Okay? And that's not any more confusing than looking at a solid bit of water called an ice cube and seeing the water. You can look at an ice cube and recognize it's water. That's easy, isn't it? Well, if I melt it, it's now evaporating. It starts to get into the liquid and then ultimately the gas phase. Are we like, oh my gosh, the ice cube died? Or did it just change form? It transitioned back to what it initially was. And so here we have the spiritual process, same thing. We condense, we slow down, equals mc squared. We take on minds and then we take on bodies. And then when we lose the body, we're in this mental state again, trying to figure out where we're going and what we're supposed to do. And this is where people find themselves in the afterlife. For a while, their body's gone. But it's not very hard to think when the body checks out for a little while. Now we got this mental process going, and a lot of the people, as they show in the movie, if they come back, they still have to work on this stuff. Now they get a body slapped on them again. And some people like that experience, some don't. We'll be talking about that in a second. But the way to picture this is clear. And so, is this afterlife after death? Would I call the body after mind? Or spirit after mind if I'm going up? It's same thing, different form. Or what Einstein said of his own equation, different manifestations of the same thing. We are spiritual beings having a physical experience. That's different manifestations of the same thing. It doesn't even take that much effort to understand, nor does it take that much effort to experience it while we're here. It's pure realization when you go, oh, okay, I don't have to do any work to realize that I'm a spiritual being. It's through grace alone I'm saved. Boom, that's it. It's all the other stuff. The mind gets in the way of the experience of having the spirit. Okay, so with that in mind, let's dive into some of the movie and some of the words that were said. Okay, some of the lines. Now again, of the about 10 people they had, that died and came back, about 7 of them had very pleasant experiences. They saw the light. They had this wonderful loving experience, okay? And about 3 of them had what they called more hellish experiences, okay? And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, but all of them had something pretty clear and consistent. No one believed them, or very few people. They had an experience, they come back from it, and they tell people what it is, and then people tell them, didn't really happen. Prove it, right? Why would you ever do that to a person? Tell me about that. That's fascinating. That's interesting. Share with me. This is what we should be doing throughout the world, right? On almost every issue. Please explain to me your perspective. And so we can come to understand, the broader picture of things. But for the near-death experience, it gets mocked, and it gets rejected as a result. And yet, it's an actual subjective experience someone had. Imagine thousands of years ago, love didn't exist until all of a sudden one caveman and cavewoman come together and they go, oh, my heart is beating faster around you. Let's come up with a word for that. We are in love now, whatever. And then all the other cave people are like, what are they acting so weird for? Well, love ultimately is evolutionary in many ways. It's also the end game of this. But that first group of people would be like, they're strange, right? They hadn't felt love yet. Okay, so human beings have this journey towards really high-end love, and if you haven't had the experience yet, let's not be telling people that it doesn't exist because you haven't had the experience. And there's no way to scientifically prove it, which makes it so much more fun, because it would take the game away from us if you could just figure it out using math. Okay, we talked about this in New Eyes, chapter 20. Sola fide means you got to have faith. And Einstein's good buddy, the mathematician Kurt Gödel, used the incompleteness theorem to demonstrate you can't use math and science to figure everything out, which I think is wonderful. You got to have faith, so faith has to be invested here. Well, people think I'm crazy is what the one person said. And thank goodness there's tons of teachings that back this person up, so this person doesn't have to think they're crazy. Muhammad, during his revelation phase, said he felt he was going crazy. Buddha was told when he tried to explain the nature of the world based upon his experience that he was crazy. So he stopped teaching for a while. Jesus just flat out acted crazy. Come on, he allowed himself to be killed. That's crazy, right? In the Tao, verse 41 says, without that crazy, it's not the Tao. To get back to the stage where you experience pure spirit, you're going to go through a crazy phase. You could call it the dark night of the soul. You're also going to have a lot of people not agree with you. And that's part of the test. It's part of the challenge. Do you really believe what you believe? And if a bunch of people call you crazy, you're going to stick with it? Ego hates that, right? But the spirit goes, yeah, I'm just going to keep going with it. And so guess what? People think I'm crazy. Good, I'm glad. That means they're ignorant. They're like that little kid holding their breath. They don't have to worry about that. You don't need their affirmation. You know what you experienced, okay? Know it more than they don't know it, okay? I felt miserable coming back. I wanted to stay, one of them said. Now, one of my favorite concepts, working with addiction. I know lots of people that have used some heavy psychedelics. It's one of my favorite things to talk to people about. Tell me about the psychedelics you've used, okay? And so many amazing experiences everyone has had that I've talked to. And we're talking hundreds, if not thousands. And the thing that I've learned talking to them over time is that I never tell them that they didn't have that experience. And you know what they always say? It felt more real than this. And when you have 1,000 or several hundred people saying to you, it felt more real, after a while you go, maybe there's something to it. Now that's my subjective experience of other people's subjective experience, okay? Is that scientific? Sure doesn't sound scientific. How the heck can you prove any of that? You can't. Don't try. Faith is evidence of things unseen. But if I experience a bunch of other people saying, this is what I experienced, I don't need to go use all the drugs to know what people have told me what it feels like. You're either interested in it or you're not. You either, like we did that in the last week's group, and the desire, you either want to come to know that you're spirit or you don't. And if you want to stay flesh, stay flesh. There's no problem with that whatsoever. But if you want to come to find spirit, you're also allowed to do that. And so I like to talk to people about their psychedelic experiences, and they all say very similar things. Whoa, man, does that feel real? But as I've also experienced with people who say use MDMA or ecstasy, feels great until 2-3 days later, and then you crash, okay, because it's cheating. If you're using a drug to induce a spiritual state where you love everyone, which is what ecstasy does for you, You can't fool Mother Nature. Because you have to replicate that state. You don't get to experience the state, cheat, look at the end, the answers and say, teacher, I got an A. Or in golf, because the objective is to get the ball in the hole. So you just pick it up and you go put it in the hole. I got a hole in one. No, there's rules to the game. Well, the rules we have is you have to experience you have to have the spiritual experience yourself without any aids. You don't get to use psychedelics to figure it out. But that's not bad if you did. It's just going to hasten your process, because people who have psychedelic experiences come back and they say the same thing. Oh man, now I'm back in Western Pennsylvania. A bunch of people who don't understand what I went through. They don't see the love out there. And now I feel depressed. I'm like, well, you got some work to do. You have to replicate that state inside yourself. Would you like to have a near-death experience to see God? Who wants to go sign up for a really bad car accident? Maybe be paralyzed or have everybody think you're crazy when you come back. You want to have that experience? You could do psychedelics to have the experience. You could hope for a near-death experience. Or you could work on your spiritual development without that stuff. That works too. In fact, no prophet ever said, find the right plant to smoke, or the right pill to crush and snort, or, maybe choke yourself out and have a near-death experience so that you could see God. None of them taught that. They told us specifically what we need to do, which is ultimately killing the ego, which is where we're headed with this. I can't be dead, said the one person, because I've never felt more alive. Well, yeah, because the thing that's death is the ego. The thing that death actually is referring to is this physical thing, which Jesus specifically is talking about in that one scripture when he says, let the dead bury the dead. It's just not very nice. Again, if you're Jesus and then there's someone that died over there and he's trying to walk away with the disciples and they're like, but Jesus, we have to have a funeral. And he says, let the dead bury the dead. Seems pretty dismissive, right? Well, how is that even possible? Any literal Bible readers? How is a dead person bury a dead person? Obviously can't happen. So clearly he's not talking about literal dead people burying dead people. Can't be. What is he talking about? Because if you think this is life, you're dead. This is death. John 6:63, the flesh counts for nothing. That's death. It's the spirit that gives life. There we go. Spirit gives life. Flesh is death. So let the dead bury the dead means let people who think physical bodies are life, let them bury each other. And again, Jesus wasn't a peacenik hippie. He told people the truth like it was. And said, it's not death. This isn't death. You can't die. That was like half his point, if not all of it. Physical bodies aren't what you are. Okay? And so the person, I can't be dead. I've never felt more alive. Of course, because the physical body is like a restrictor plate in NASCAR. It slows down the car. Restrictor plates do. And if it slows down the car, it can't go as fast anymore. Well, the body, as I already did in equals MC squared, slows down the spirit. Work this equation backwards. All right? The body, by definition, is slowed down the spirit. So what happens if you remove the body? If you take the MC squared part out of this, you just have E. And that E is light. In the beginning, God said, let there be light. Here we are. And then Jesus comes and says, oh yeah, you are the light. And put that together. What other Bible verses do you need? In the beginning, let there be light, and all of this was made out of the light, and you are the light, says Jesus. So guess what that means? You're all of this. And when people die, they go see this light, and it's welcoming them home because they're looking at themselves. They're looking at their true self. It's the spirit that's presenting itself to them. And it's them. Of course it feels great. But when you come back to earth and you get the body back, here's the restrictor plate again. Got to walk around doing all this physical stuff. No, you're the light. Remember, you're the light. Don't forget that. That was what Buddha was frustrated with, because he was so close, but he had to stay focused until he broke through and he realized, oh yeah, I am the light. Now if I could just stay there. That's all of our job collectively. Okay? So of course, the person's not dead. You never die. You just slowed down with these silly things. They're not silly. They're fun tools for this game. Which is why I left this up here, the Pac-Man thing from last week. We're just playing a game, just like bodies play Pac-Man. Souls are playing this game. And the goal is to realize you're not the character in the game. That's it. That's awakening. That's it. And once you realize that, you're good to go. Okay? And so, of course, you can never die. No more than Pac-Man can die. That doesn't make any sense. So I like to say this is a good movie. I recommend everyone watch it. But then again, I recommend everyone watch every movie. because, all things work together for good for those who love God. So of course, do it. Sure, why not? Okay. And I've joked with a lot of people over the years working with addiction. Everything in the world has been snorted at some point. Okay. Everything's been crushed and smoked. Okay. Because people are always looking for the next fix at some point. Carpet fibers. Maybe these will get me high. But then we rule out pretty quickly the ones that don't work. Okay. Crush things, snort them, and then figure them out. Guess what? Look under a rock. Go watch this movie. See if it inspires you. It inspires some, not others. Duh. Christianity inspires some, not others. Islam inspires some, but not others. Einstein inspires some, not others. AA does that. Okay? It depends. So, of course, go watch it, but I'd like to see the sequel already. Because the movie missed one thing. Okay? The two people in the movie, two lines that were said towards the end. Heaven is light. God is light. And here I am on this side of this, glass wall or something, and the light's on that side or something, and I can't wait to get to the light, but I have to die first. Okay? Well, no. Why don't they emphasize that the reason why people struggled when they came back, why people were miserable when they came back, I felt miserable coming back, because they didn't realize you don't have to die to access the light. It's you. You just have to realize it. That takes some work, okay? Doesn't have to be as much as we think, but that's what we have to do. So they say heaven is the light, God is the light, and then I'm waiting. Come on, it's a Christian movie. I mean, they say it's not, but it is. It's a Christian movie, and say, and you are the light. Why didn't they let their leaders say that? That would have been a great place for that line to be said. Okay, well, you are the light. So yeah, heaven, God, all of this equals MC squared. It's all of us. We're literally looking at each other in the light. We're in heaven right now. Jesus says, I stood in your midst, and they didn't recognize it. We're there, okay? No more effort needs to be done. Heaven is the light, God is the light, we are the light. And then the one guy towards the end says, well, the thing he got from his experience is you realize that you are not a body. Okay? You can't be any more true than that. Because if you realize you're not a body, now you don't need a near-death experience. If you realize that it's not about our labels, and it's not about the flesh aspect of things, on any level, anywhere, okay? All spiritual teachings are addressing spiritual things, not physical. That's where religion gets screwed up. Well, maybe if we just applied this stuff in the physical world, then people would be nice to each other. This world wasn't set up. I mean, it's literally, like the Buddha says, set up to make us suffer, okay? There ain't no fixing the world. The world's just fine as it is. Would it be fun to play Pac-Man without any ghosts? It's just this endless series of cookies you just get to eat. Who would play that game? Right? Just go, cookie, cookie, cookie. Oh, here's a cherry. And just keep playing it. Boring, okay? You need some ghosts. You need some adversity. You need the darkness. You need the opposite of you in the game. All of that stuff, okay? And so, of course, you're not a body. Now, if you need some psychedelics or near-death experience to recognize that, again, I'm not saying that it's good or bad. All things work together for good for those of God. You'll figure something out. You'll figure it out eventually. You don't need that. But all you need to do to have the experience is recognizing this one concept. The death that everyone's talking about is just what has to happen to the ego. And I'm not even a big fan of the concept of ego death anyways. I don't want my ego to die, per se. I just want to tame it. I want to go from Steve's physical being to Steve secondarily physical being, with my primary awareness being my spiritual self. Then I can live out the rest of my life not afraid of death. I'll also be my best self because I'll be channeling the Holy Spirit. And of course, this is everyone's option. Everyone can seek that at this dying itself. That ego needs to decrease. The spirit needs to increase. Ultimately, all that means is after death is just the taming of the ego.